I am tired of this nonsense, Kemi. You talk to me like I am nothing. Like I don't matter. Femi shouted, his broad shoulders heaving with rage. Standing across the room, her hands trembling, Kemi wiped a tear from her cheek. She had been through this before, too many times. The shouting, the insults, the threats were always the same. Her voice shook as she spoke. I talk to you like nothing. Femi, do you even hear yourself? Do you hear the way you speak to me? The way you treat me? Her voice cracked, but she refused to look away. Femi stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists, but Kemi did not move back. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made things worse. You are my wife, Kemi. My wife? Is it too much to ask for respect? His voice was dangerously low now. Kemi let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Respect. You demand respect, but you give none. Femi, when last did you even ask me how I feel? When last did you treat me like a wife and not a punching bag? Silence. Femi turned his face away, breathing heavily. He knew she was right, but his pride would not let him admit it. Kemi looked at him, her eyes filled with pain. She had once loved this man with everything in her. Once, his voice had been her comfort, his touch her peace. Now, she only saw a stranger, a man she no longer recognized. She sank into the couch, her mind slipping into memories. 8 years ago. Lagos was alive that night, the streets busy with cars honking and people moving about. The city never truly slept, and that was what Kemi loved most about it. She had just finished a long shift at the hospital and was waiting by the roadside for a cab when a sleek black car pulled beside her. Kemi, a familiar voice called. She turned and saw Femi smiling, that smile that had once made her heart race. He looked sharp, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers. Femi, she said, surprised. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same. A beautiful woman like you shouldn't be standing by the roadside at night. Let me give you a ride. She hesitated, but before she could say no, he had already stepped out of the car and opened the door for her. Femi had always been like that, confident, charming, and persuasive. She had fallen for him so easily, like a moth to a flame. As he drove, he talked about his new business venture, dreams, and plans. She listened, laughing at his jokes and admiring his drive. I have big dreams, Kemi. I want to build something great, and I want you by my side when I do. The words had melted her heart. At that moment, she had believed him. Kemi blinked, snapping back to reality. She looked at Femi now, the same man who had once promised her a future filled with love and happiness. But where was that love now? Where was the man who had once held her hand and whispered sweet words in her ear? She stood up. Femi, I can't do this anymore. His head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean I can't keep living like this. Every day, I feel like I am walking on glass, afraid of when the next fight will come. This is not love, Femi. This is a war, and I am tired of fighting. His face hardened. So what? You want to leave? You want to run away because marriage is not all roses and champagne. Her chest ached. Marriage is not about suffering either. It's not about fear. Femi scoffed, shaking his head. You are ungrateful, Kemi. After everything I have done for you. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay calm. Femi, love is not a debt. I don't owe you my life because you married me. His jaw clenched. So you're really thinking of leaving? Kemi looked away. She had thought about it many times before, but something always held her back. Fear, maybe. Or hope, the foolish hope that one day, he would change. Femi ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. He walked to the table, picked up his car keys, and turned to her. I need air. She said nothing as he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Kemi sank back into the couch, her heart heavy. She had always believed in love. She had believed in Femi. But love was not supposed to hurt this much. Sitting there, she thought about her mother's words, spoken so many years ago. Kemi, my child, marriage is not about endurance. If a man ever makes you question your worth, leave. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Had she become the woman her mother warned her not to be? Kemi sat in the dimly lit apartment, staring at the door Femi had slammed shut. The air still carried the tension of their fight, but now, there was only silence. A deep, aching silence pressed down on her chest. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. This wasn't the first time Femi had stormed out like this. He would come back smelling of alcohol or anger, depending on which poison he had chosen for the night. Then, he would either apologize in a cold, detached voice or pretend nothing happened. But this time felt different. This time, she felt different. The sound of the front door opening jolted her back to reality. Femi was back. She stood up as he walked in, his face unreadable. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. He had been drinking. Kemi's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. Femi, we need to talk. He scoffed, tossing his keys on the table. Not this again, Kemi. I don't have the strength for another lecture. I'm leaving, she said, her voice firm. Femi froze. He turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. What did you just say? I said I'm leaving. A slow, bitter smile spread across his face. Oh, so now you think you're bold. He stepped closer. Where will you go? Your family? You cut them off for me. Your friends. You barely have any left. Kemi swallowed hard, but she refused to let him see her fear. Don't act like you don't need me, Kemi. You're nothing without me, he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. Something inside her snapped. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her words cutting through the air like a blade. I was something before you, Femi. And I will be something after you. His eyes darkened. You think walking away will be easy? No, she admitted. But staying will kill me. Femi's jaw clenched, and for a moment, she thought he might hit her again. Instead, he let out a dry laugh and turned away. Go, then, he muttered. See if the world is as kind as you think it is. 3 days later. Kemi stood outside her parents' house, her suitcase by her side. She hadn't spoken to them in years, not properly. Femi had made sure of that. He had convinced her that they were too controlling, too judgmental. They didn't want her to be happy. She raised her hand and knocked. The door swung open, and her older mother stood with more wrinkles and grayer hair but the same sharp eyes. Eyes that took one look at Kemi's face and saw everything. Without a word, she pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. Kemi broke down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. "SHHH, my child," her mother whispered, stroking her back. "You are home now." And for the first time in years, Kemi believed it. Kemi sat in the familiar living room of her childhood home, sipping a cup of warm tea. It had been 3 days since she left Femi, but the wounds of her marriage still clung to her like a shadow. Her mother sat across from her, watching quietly. Finally, she spoke. "You should have come home sooner, Kemi." Kemi lowered her gaze. "I was ashamed, Mama. I didn't want you to say, I told you so." Her mother let out a tired sigh. Kemi, when a mother warns her child about fire, it's not because she wants to be right, it's because she doesn't want her child to get burned. Kemi swallowed hard, emotions tightening her throat. "I wanted to fix him." Her mother shook her head. "You are not God, my dear. Love is not about fixing someone who refuses to change. Love should never cost you your peace, your dignity, or your safety. Kemi wiped a tear from her cheek. I loved him, Mama. I still do. But I don't think he ever truly loved me. Her mother reached for her hand. Maybe he did in his own way, but love without respect is just possession. He didn't love you the way you deserved. Kemi took a shaky breath, nodding slowly. Deep down, she knew her mother was right. But the pain of letting go was still raw. 1 week later, Kemi sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, when a message popped up. It was Femi's and it reads, "I hope you're happy now." Running away like a coward. She stared at the message for a long moment. Once, Femi's words had the power to break her. But now, all she felt was exhaustion. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened another message, one from her former boss at the hospital. Dr. Adebayo, Kemi, I had your back in town. If you're ready, there's an opening for you. We would love to have you back. A small smile tugged at her lips. For so long, she had allowed Femi to dictate her life, to make her believe she was nothing without him. But now, she was reclaiming herself. She took a deep breath and typed a reply. I would love to come back, she replied.